All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Andy. Welcome to this week's Team Kentucky Update. We've had some power surges here at the Capitol, so starting a little bit late, but hoping we will make it through without the lights flickering anymore. I'm thrilled to start today by sharing recent successes in economic development throughout the Commonwealth. Today, that includes training funds approved for 16 Kentucky companies and a groundbreaking for a homegrown company, furthering the significant growth we've seen in our state's bourbon industry. I'll start by highlighting our continued investment in workforce training initiatives. Last week, the Bluegrass State Skills Corporation approved nearly $830,000 in funding to provide workforce training for more than 2,100 Kentucky workers. This program assists employers throughout the Commonwealth to provide occupational and skills upgrade training. These incentives are available to a range of Kentucky industries, including manufacturing, agribusiness, non-retail service or technology, renewable energy production, state-licensed hospital operations, and more. The funding approved at this week's meeting, pushed the state's support in fiscal year 2023 to 4.6 million people for $4.6 million for 76 applicants throughout the Commonwealth that'll train 14,800 individuals. And with approvals to date since July of 2021, the programs have provided $13 million in funding and credits to support more than 50,000 trainees. To continue the economic momentum that we are experiencing, we have to have a pipeline for skilled workforce, and what a program, to make sure that 50,000 Kentuckians have the skills needed by our new and changing economy. Appreciate BSSC and all the work they're doing to make this possible. I also want to highlight Kentucky's continued growth in our signature bourbon and spirits industry. Since the start of my administration, we have seen more growth in this industry than ever before, and it isn't even close. We've seen 80 new location or expansion projects totaling $3 billion of new investment, creating 1,440 new full-time jobs. In fact, 2022 was by far the biggest year for bourbon in its history, $2.1 billion of new investment. That is a record, and more travelers on the Bourbon Trail, more tourists than ever before in our history. Adding to our growth is a Kentucky-founded distilling company called Bluegrass Distillers. Last week, I had the opportunity to join leaders from Bluegrass Distillers to break ground on their new Midway distillery. I was there along with Senator Thayer, proving that bourbon could bring any two people together in celebration. The company is investing $8 million in the new operation on the historic Elkwood Farm property in Woodford County. It's going to create 22 new full-time jobs. This is a really incredible facility they're going to build. It centers around the Elkwood Mansion, which I believe was abandoned or nearly abandoned. It was built in 1835, and it's listed on the National Register of Historic Places. It's going to be a distillery where they're going to be able to show everything from, the growing of the crops into the actual distilling itself. This is going to increase Bluegrass Distillers' capacity by over 100 times, and this is going to be a featured tourist destination along that bourbon trail. By the way, the founders and those that run it, one from Moorhead, one from Woodford County. These are two Kentucky individuals, one who moved back, which is what we want to see. Our talent staying in Kentucky or coming back to Kentucky. In fact, we want to create so many good jobs that other states' talent moves to us. All right, next, we've been taking action to fuel our workforce because we know that world-class companies bet their future on Kentucky. It's because they know that they can count on our people. We've taken steps recently to improve our workforce that include getting folks healthier by expanding Medicaid to include vision, hearing, and dental care. If we want people to be able to get to work, they got to be able to see well enough to drive to work. We want them to be safe at work. They've got to be able to hear well enough to hear instructions or warning. We've also launched a program to help employers guide their workers to addiction services when in need, and establishing recovery-ready communities to make sure that we can promote second chance employment as people ultimately beat addiction, get into recovery, and restore their lives. We're also working on second chances with the Justice Cabinet and the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce on a prison to work pipeline. These are folks that have paid their debt to society, and getting them a job with a willing employer is not only a win for that employer, it's the number one thing we can do to help somebody not reoffend, which makes our communities safer. And we're once again pushing for universal pre-K through our Education First plan. No other step will put as many people back into the workforce in a short period of time by resolving any and all child care issues, whether they are affordability or whether it is availability. Universal pre-K resolves that for all of those young parents that could get back in the workforce. We're also continuing to invest in our career and technical centers, committing, along with the legislature, $245 million to renovate and rebuild these facilities in our high schools. We are already seeing companies choosing Kentucky and choosing a region because of these renovations and the career and technical centers and the incredible work that they do. We are taking these and other steps needed to support our workers. And we have some good news to report on apprenticeship programs specifically. Recently, the Kentucky Center for Statistics published an analysis saying in 2021, there were 4,400 active apprentices earning a paycheck while getting hands-on learning and direct work experience throughout Kentucky. According to the U.S. Department of Labor, that number increased to 4,800 in 2022, up 400 new apprentices in a year. Our program is helping employers build and retain a qualified workforce and providing better opportunities for our people. Kentucky's number of registered apprentices increased 105% between 2013 and 2021. That's 17 percentage points above the national average. Kentucky's apprentices are also becoming more diverse, and I'm seeing that in real time in my travels. The share of female apprentices has gone from 3% in 2015 to 16% in 2021. Nearly 30% of apprentices are people of color, up from 13.4% in 2013, and nearly half of apprentices are under the age of 24. We currently have 301 apprentice program sponsors, which include employers, unions, associations, public schools, and community colleges. 33 of these programs are new, added in 2022. Together, these sponsors offer apprenticeships in more than 200 separate occupations. The occupation with the most active apprenticeships in 2022 was electricians, with 1,147 apprentices working in Kentucky. Other top occupations with active apprentices include power line workers, steel workers, plumbers, certified nurse assistants, and child care development specialists. So congratulations to all these apprentices. It is great to see these programs growing and working, especially with the pipeline that they create to so many of these new jobs coming into Kentucky. And as you see from a lot of these, they're jobs that are needed to even build the facilities that are coming. To learn more, visit kystats.ky.gov. But from time to time, we want to try to show you areas that we are seeing improvement and trends that we're seeing through the data. I next want to remind people about the Better Internet Listening Tour that we announced last week. Expanding access to high-speed, reliable internet continues to be one of my top priorities and that of my administration. It is vital infrastructure, as critical as our roads and bridges, and it's necessary to improve and enhance the daily lives of Kentuckians and to support future economic growth. Last week, I announced a 14-stop, if we could put it up, 6-week Better Internet Listening Tour that allow us to hear directly from local leaders in education, healthcare, and agriculture, as well as community partners, business owners, and residents, as we identify where more work needs to be done. The tour will be led by our Office of Broadband Development as we create a statewide plan to ensure investments are made where access is most critically needed. Joining the tour will be representatives from the Education and Labor Cabinet who want to hear directly from citizens in their own community, so folks don't have to drive to Frankfort to help us formulate the very best plan that helps them. We're working to develop a digital equity plan to close the gap in access that has existed in Kentucky for far too long. The listening tour kicks off Tuesday, February 14th in Hopkinsville. It'll end Tuesday, March 23rd in Florence. We will post an entire schedule online for it. This is your chance to make sure that we as a state know if you don't have access where you are, if the maps are potentially wrong, this is your chance to help us deploy the dollars that are in more than ever before in the best way possible to help you. You can learn more at broadband.ky.gov, but never more important to hear from our citizens on this than right now, as we've just come off the largest public sector investment in broadband in our history. We have another round of those dollars. It's going to be even larger that are in the queue right now. The responses have come in, and we announced another, I think, $180-something million of federal funds coming directly into that program. This is our best shot at getting broadband internet to every part of Kentucky. And I hope everybody agrees that that's not red or blue. It is just necessary infrastructure that our state needs. All right, I want to go over a couple of things that have happened this week at the Capitol. So if you come to the Capitol right now during this session, you will see something that resembles a pre-COVID session, more so than I think at any time since March of 2020. There are events going on in the rotunda. Every day there are lots of different advocacy groups here making their voices heard. So Tuesday, I was honored to be invited to join the legislative Black History Month celebration. The special event honored African-American leaders of the past, present, and future. Many of those leaders are known worldwide, like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who said that when one commits themselves to the noble struggle for equal rights, they make themselves a better person. They make a greater nation of their country, and they make a finer world to live in. Those words reminded me of great Kentuckians like Darrell Owens, who we honored last year and sadly lost between last year and this year. I think we have a responsibility and to honor Darrell and so many others' legacies by continuing their work to ensure that prosperity and opportunity reach every part of Kentucky and every community in each of our cities. Because there's still so much work left to be done, and our children deserve so much better. They deserve a more just and inclusive Commonwealth, one where they can pursue their dreams and provide for their families. As governor, but most importantly, as the dad of 2 middle schoolers, I'm committed to listening, learning, and taking intentional action. Because I know that if we work together for the inches that become the feet, that become the miles of progress, we can make real, impactful, lasting change. And events like the one on Tuesday give me great hope because so many great leaders committed to working together to ensure the prosperity we're seeing reaches every single Kentuckian. This week, I also got visited by some really brave kids in this very room. These are kids that have congenital heart defects or CHD. This is the most common birth defect, and early detection can be life-saving. So together with the helps of my friends, Evie, Jaden, Gabby, Luke, Story, and Graydon, who you see right there, we proudly proclaim this week as Congenital Heart Defects Awareness Week here in Kentucky. Pretty incredible, special, important kids. And these children weren't the only one that are in the Capitol this week. The hallways have been filled with young kids and young adults. From Kentucky Youth Advocates Children's Advocacy Day to students visiting with Mercy Academy and so many more, our future leaders were here, and they've been vocal and loud, and that's a good thing. As our kids face more hardships, more difficulty, more pressures, and maybe at any time, at least in my lifetime. And we should be making and crafting our policies by listening to them. And we're making sure that we're investing in them too, so that they can see that brighter future. From our Education First plan, which includes universal pre-K, funding for social emotional support services, and a raise to address our teacher shortage, to ensuring our kids have access to nutritional support, health care, and more, we're always going to be there for our Kentucky children, each one a child of God. These were some really fun days. In fact, the high schoolers from Mercy Academy had Brittany and me do our first Be Real. Actually, that was your first Be Real, Brittany, who is here. I think that, yeah. She says she's still confused. If you're like me and you don't know what that is, try Googling it, but they were nice enough to teach us as well. Other great meetings that I was able to have, other great groups that are going around right now. Leadership Hopkins County. talking to them about the rebuilding and the great jobs that have come in my dad's home county. Leadership Louisville, which my pastor was with. So I had to be really careful about my presentation. To magistrates and commissioners, to nursing students from Lindsey Wilson College of Nursing. Talk about an amazing visit where I'm so excited about how we are addressing our nursing shortage. And these are folks that have signed up for this after seeing the pandemic. Imagine that. Really special. As well as Kentucky Agriculture Leadership Program, who were here this morning. Each of these Kentuckians is playing an important role in building a brighter future for all of us. And yesterday, we also came together in the Rotunda for something really important: awareness around an issue that impacts so many of our Kentucky families, and that's addiction. Addiction stops people from reaching their potential. It takes the lives of parents, caregivers, brothers and sisters, or for far too many people that I've met, like Emily Walden, our children. Addiction tears at the very fabric of our communities. It threatens to slow our economic progress, and it hurts each and every community every time that we lose someone. But during this event, I was able to look around a packed rotunda. This was the first time they've held this specific event. And I felt that hope because there are a lot of folks living out their faith and their values, lifting up their neighbors in need. And a lot of these brave individuals, including these moms, were wearing shirts that said, "This is what addiction looks like." Talk about breaking the stigma. These brave folks were willing to show up with that on their shirt, to look at people and say, it's okay. It happens to anybody, and there's help out there. So many of these people are also in peer support. What that means is, after getting in recovery, they could have run from their trauma, but they run back to it to help that next person. And for everybody out there that is struggling with addiction, it takes a lot of bravery to ask for help. But you know what? There's a lot of brave people who are in this rotunda who are just waiting to help you and want to help get you better. As Attorney General, I put addiction issues first, specifically the opioid crisis, where I took on those drug companies that flooded tiny counties with tens of thousands of pills for every individual who lives in them. I sued more of these companies than any other Attorney General because of the communities that they almost destroyed. And we've held them responsible. I walked in the courtroom time and time again during the pendency of those cases where some big New York City lawyer tried to tell a judge that it was somehow our fault, that we knew how addictive these are. I stood up for the people of Kentucky, and thankfully, we're starting to see settlement funds now flow in that I hope mean we can end this addiction crisis in our lifetime. It arose in our lifetime, and this is not something we should allow or require that our kids finish the mission. We have got to make sure this funding, this blood money, goes where it should. As governor, I've remained laser focused on this issue, from dedicating and funding support for recovery services and facilities. In fact, with ARC, we opened what we believe is the largest treatment center in the United States in what used to be St. Catherine College, to implementing recovery-ready communities, find recovery housing, and other programs, to creating intervention services like nurturing parenting and others. We are committed. We are committed to not just talking tough, but to actually helping folks that need our help. And speaking about living out our true Kentucky spirit, this morning I met with our steel workers. These folks are crucial to our success here in Kentucky. They are heroes who have raised the standard of living and quality of life for all of our workers. And let me tell you, they are busy working on all these economic development projects. They are just as excited as I am about the incredible things happening in our economy. Since I took office, 43,000 new full-time jobs. That's 43,000 Kentuckians that have the dignity of work and the security of knowing how they're going to put food on their table. So today, I proclaim February 9th, 2023 as United Steelworker Lobby Day in the Commonwealth. And the week isn't over yet. Tonight, before traveling to the National Governors Association, where I'll have my first meeting as the head of the Appalachian Regional Commission, I'll be speaking at the Kentucky Chamber Dinner, discussing some exciting things that are going on here in Kentucky. What you're going to hear from me won't be partisan, won't be right or left, won't be blue or red. It'll be about working together not to move a state to the right or the left, but to move it forward. All right, update on flooding in Eastern Kentucky. So far, total approved from FEMA is more than $98 million. That's $607,000 more from last week. Every week, we see more dollars going out. Since February 1st, an additional 6 applicants have received the maximum amount. If you need help, call FEMA directly or visit a multi-agency resource center. Commonwealth Sheltering Program. This is really great news. We no longer have any families pending on a waiting list for the travel trailer sheltering program. This is a big moment where we said we were cresting as people were transitioning out. But as excited as I am that no one is pending on that list, the 164 households that have transitioned out mean that they have found more stable housing, and that is a good sign. We're down to 223 travel trailers occupied, 582 individuals sheltered. On our state parks, we're down to 24. On the buyout program, it continues, and this is the fastest we've ever seen a buyout program work. That's when FEMA buys out the property if it's in the flood zone, so someone can use those dollars to move, hopefully, to a safer place. But the buyout program is also important because if you flooded and FEMA provides dollars, the next time it floods, they might not under their regular program. So the buyout program is really important to at least give someone an alternative. This week, we have over $8.8 million in awards for the buyout programs. Those are 51 properties from Perry County, the city of Jackson, and Breathitt County. Homeowners wishing to learn more about the program are encouraged to contact their local judge executive or emergency management. Team Eastern Kentucky Flooding Relief Fund sitting at $13.1 million. $4.4 million has already been dispersed. That's $440,000 in funeral expenses. It's over $4 million in $500 checks that have gone out to folks that were FEMA approved. Now, then there's money that we've committed, right? When you commit money, especially for rebuilding a house, you typically pay it at the end of the construction. But you've already pledged that money, and you've signed memorandums of agreements with folks like Habitat and others. And so that is a pool that while if you look at our bank account is still sitting in it, is actively helping to build houses at that time and has been committed, even contractually committed. So we've already committed $800,000 additional dollars for building new home and new home repair, and right now reserving the remaining dollars for the new construction that would occur on these higher ground communities that we've now secured 2 sets of property for. Obviously, the construction of the homes has to await or be coordinated with getting the infrastructure, the water and the power and the rest there. But this is a fund aimed at longer term recovery. And if we spent all of that now and didn't leave any money to work with those nonprofits, our ability to rebuild the number of houses that we need, we just wouldn't be able. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the Western Kentucky Tornado Relief Fund. I'd like to clear up a couple things about it. So every week since it's been created, we have updated the entire Commonwealth on the dollars in the fund, the donors to the fund, and how the fund has been spent. We've testified on the fund and expenditures 4 or 5 times in front of different committees of the General Assembly to their satisfaction, and every payment we've made has been subject to open records the entire time the fund has existed. Additionally, every time a decision has been made, we haven't just announced it here, we've added it to our website, which has been tracking in real time every decision on where dollars are going, the amount that are going there, and giving people information that they need if they want to follow up on any of those expenditures. This level of transparency of both weekly announcements about amounts and expenditures, about the website that is updating it, and about all of it being subject to open records and testimony 4 to 5 times, is significantly more transparency that exists in either a nonprofit fund where that information isn't available, or a private sector fund where certainly that information is not available. There have been many advantages to the fund. Let's talk the first about timing. As hard as we pushed, it took until the very end of the 2022 legislative session to create the Western Kentucky Safe Fund. months, I think 4 months after the tornadoes. That's how much time it took, despite having everybody in Frankfurt, to get that fund created. And that fund does not provide a single dollar that can go directly to individuals. First advantage of the two funds is that you can make some immediate payments that I think we should all agree are important. It helps us pay for funerals. If we didn't have the Western Kentucky Tornado Relief Fund or the Eastern Kentucky Flooding Fund, then people would have to pay out of their pocket and ask FEMA for reimbursement that could come months later. Imagine losing your home, losing a family member, trying to figure out where that comes from, and then having to fill out forms to make sure that you can get that money. We were able to provide it directly based on information we tracked from coroners and others to make sure we took care of every one of those families. It also helps you to get an initial round of checks out if you have the dollars, like we did much earlier in the Western Kentucky Tornado Relief Fund, and we already have in Eastern Kentucky, to help folks when they need it early on while saving certain amounts of money for the long-term rebuilding. They also allow flexibility to deal with issues that pop up. In Western Kentucky, it was our farmers. The Mayfield granary being destroyed was going to put family farms under because of the extra expense of how far they were going to have to drive it. And it allows support for nonprofits on long-term rebuild. For instance, we are funding 300 new homes in Western Kentucky right now. And finally, it lets us do it in ways that not even the Red Cross can, and that is without any administrative costs. There was $0 taken out for state employees doing significant amounts of work because we wanted to get it all out. Now, to do that relies on us relying on outside sources to do the verification. And we chose a couple of them in these instances, and I'll talk through those in a minute. One is FEMA, who, as many people have reported, has an incredibly rigorous program. Many have objected to, says it's too hard to get through. And what FEMA will say is we're doing our best to have as little fraud as possible, but that means we've got to create more and more hoops for people to jump through. And then the private sector, in terms of people who have insurance, that have experience reviewing those claims, certainly for decades, if not hundreds of years. So let's talk through and put it up how the dollars have been paid out of the Team Western Kentucky Tornado Relief Fund, because I saw something about somebody asking. I have questions on how it's been spent. It's been out there. It's been out there since the day that we announced each of these. Right now, every dollar of this fund has been spent or pledged. In other words, it's already gone out the door, or there is a program where we promised a group that are doing things that the funding would be available if needed. So the first $810,000 helped us bury our dead and mourn their passing. And I'm really glad we have this fund, especially to help people going through that. No need to apply for reimbursement. And in fact, the head of FEMA looked at me and said, no one's done this before. It was a really good idea, and it was showing kindness and compassion to our people. All right, we initially made payments to insured and uninsured homeowners and renters. We used two pieces of data for this, and we had no issues with the checks that went out. We used the FEMA list of who had secured individual assistance at any different level, and we used the insurance companies of how many people have filed a successful claim and have had to pay a deductible. Those were the two data sets that were used for that $9.6 million. That was about 7,500 checks that went out early on. Then we had $3.9 million for assistance to local farmers. This was a program that the county judge of Graves County asked for, and it was a program that local farmers themselves helped come up with the criteria for it. Then we pledged $16 million to build 300 homes through nonprofits. I think we have about 75 of those, either completed or nearing the end of construction. These dollars only go out when the home is completed, though we are looking at some slight changes in that because we would like to speed up the timetable in which some of these are being built. There are 3 nonprofits that we have memorandums of agreement with that pledge these dollars as they build these homes. We have $12 million pledged for unmet needs and life essentials in cooperation with long-term recovery groups. This is groups that are out there that are doing their best, that have dollars, but they are dollars where, because we don't have a FEMA who has verified something, or a insurance company that's verified something, that we require those long-term recovery groups to submit documentation so that we know these individuals have been harmed. We also had to set a specific limit to make sure that there would be enough for everyone. We had one county really trying to help their people that asked $240-something thousand for about 9 folks that had been harmed. It'd be real hard to justify that there when we couldn't have provided that amount of money for elsewhere. And then finally, this was our last distribution, $10 million in $1,000 checks to survivors. And let's talk through how that was done. First, we did not generate any of those names ourselves. Those names came, if you could put it up, from one of 2 lists. And these were the only way that we got names. Names didn't come and couldn't come from anywhere else. First, we asked FEMA, tell us anybody who got through your program after all your verifications for any amount of money. And we got that list, names and addresses. And then we went back to private insurance and said, you guys do the same for everything you've been through. Anybody who had a check mailed to them was on one of these 2 lists, because there's no other list. I mean, this is it. All the 10,000 are on either FEMA or private insurance. There was no other name that we got. And so I'll walk through some other numbers. But if there is a person who received a check going through one of the 2 of these, and they didn't apply for either of these, then someone has used their name to do it, and or they are in one of these systems in error, because we don't have another system, right? Just 2 lists. And anybody we sent a check to is on one of those 2. And there's a reason that we relied on these 2, because it would have cost millions of dollars, millions, if we'd have had state employees or outside groups triple check. And my concern, if we triple check FEMA, is that FEMA then adds 3 more requirements to people when it's already far too hard to get approved. Okay, so we send out 10,000 checks. And when you send out 10,000 checks, you expect to have some returned for different reasons. Many of those reasons are normal reasons, like having a name misspelled, like having an address where somebody has moved, or for 11 of these checks, the individuals had died between when they'd made and gotten their claims and today. So for instance, those 11, I believe it's 11 or 12, we are then able to reprocess with the estate and provide that back out. So to date, of the 193 checks that have been canceled, 33 have been reissued. And that means those are 33 where people worked with us, told us what was wrong. They should be getting a check, and it was sent back out. Now, of other numbers, right now, we only have 19 checks where someone has communicated with us and suggested directly that they think there is fraud. That's 19 out of the 10,000. That doesn't mean that there might not be another out there, especially if someone says they weren't a tornado survivor. But these 19 we have and are referring to FEMA for follow-up on fraud. There are 26 payments that someone sent back with an explanation, and we are looking through those, but did not necessarily indicate that there is fraud. But some of those have notations on them where we want to follow up. We are likely going to refer all 26 of these as well to FEMA so that they can review and determine if they think there is fraud. I'm sorry, 13 individuals from that original checks had passed away. We're reissuing those in the names of their estates. 6 had the wrong name on them, right? So those are being reissued. There were 2 duplicate checks, so they are not being reissued. There were 12 checks where the payee contacted PPC indicating that a check had not been received after a sufficient time for delivery, so we had to stop payment. Something wrong either in the mail, something wrong with it getting delivered, but they called in. We saw that we mailed a check. They hadn't gotten it. You want to cancel and stop that check, so you call over to the state treasurer for that. And then there are 4 others at least that had some printing error on it, and those are not being reissued. So that is a breakdown of what we know. If, in fact, that 19 number holds, that would be 0.1% of the mailing having any issue. But really, if you look at mail checks, it's the 2 combined. The 0.1 would be the first 7,500 that we didn't have issues with, and then the additional 10,000. But as you look at a $52 million fund, if you look at an error or a fraud rate that is at or below 1% for that fund, that is better than any government-run associated fund that you will find anywhere in the United States. And in the end of the day, like a group from Western Kentucky said to us this morning, it meant there was $52 million out there to help rebuild this community. All right, let's give a juvenile justice update. As we've been discussing for the last several months, my administration is taking strong and quick action to make our detention center safer for youth and staff. If we can put up the steps that we have taken, we've gone over them, but this is step after step after step after step to make these facilities safer. These are the most significant changes since the DJJ system was actually created. And in fact, a lot of these steps have been needed for a long time. There will be some who say that this is a Beshear administration issue. It's not. Remember back in 2016, in the last administration, we lost a youth in pre-detention DJJ facility in Elizabethtown. And at that time, if you remember, the report that came out said you've got to pay juvenile justice workers more. There were also other recommendations that would require funding. The legislature took no action in 2016, 17, 18, 19. Listen, everybody has ownership and should have ownership, not just in how we got where we are, but how we fix it. And I'm certainly willing to take ownership because these employees being harmed are executive branch employees, and these juveniles are in our facilities. But if we're going to get this right, we need a legislature not trying to cast blame, but to work with us. And we need a judicial system where district judges aren't sending truants to these DJJ facilities anymore. Again, that's been going on for a long time. So a couple of just the most recent updates I'm going to go over. KSP has 2 uniformed troopers at Adair, Fayette, and Warren detention centers. Those are our higher level, 24/7. They're just there to intervene in a significant emergency. They are not there to provide other services or day-to-day activity. And this was pretty neat. This happened the other day, and it's one administration working together. We continue to have major staffing challenges. And we most recently saw that in the last couple days in our Campbell County Detention Center for females. A couple things happened. We lost a couple of employees, and then we have more juveniles on suicide watch there right now than we have in a long time. And that takes additional workers to help. So we put out the call for help, and more than 30 correctional officers and probation and parole officers from the Department of Corrections have responded and volunteered to assist the Campbell Juvenile Detention Center until they are fully staffed. Additionally, a handful of detention center workers from Boyd Juvenile Detention Center will also be assisting. But let me just make clear, as we're moving forward with significant staffing changes that are going to take some time to catch up, we may have to move both youth and our workers when necessary. For instance, right now, there are very few youth in Boyd County. I think we were at 9 the other day, but it's one of our better staffed facilities. And so as we look at a real staffing shortage across the continuum, we may face a day where, because of staff to make it safe, we have to move youth from one facility to another and combine those workforces just to ensure that we can create that safe environment. Now, raising pay to $50,000 for these center workers is critically important. But let me say this. We were asked by the working group to provide the dollars that are needed to truly make this change, to end the challenges we're facing, to resolve what was brought up in 2016, or at least was laid bare in 2016, and we provided it. Funding request after funding request after funding request that's needed for top-of-the-line facilities, enough employees, the types of programming that's needed. Thus far, we haven't seen one bill introduced by the General Assembly that includes any of that. So I'll make sure I'm being real clear. We were asked what it takes. We provided them what it takes. And right now, at least, we're seeing an unwillingness, at least to submit a bill, to fund what's necessary right now. If we don't have the dollars to do everything we need, if we are denied the dollars, which would be the case, then as we move forward, that puts a lot more culpability on the General Assembly. All right. Brittany says I'm going long. Real quickly on public health, the flu remains elevated but continues to decline. COVID-19 has kind of leveled out. The emergency, the federal emergency ending is going to change things. People are going to have to pay for things they did not in the past, so we ought to be prepared for it. Now I'm going to turn it over to the First Lady to name our Team Kentucky All-Stars, and then I'll answer some questions.
Good afternoon. This Sunday is the Super Bowl, which means people all across the Commonwealth will be headed to the supermarket to stock up on last-minute snacks and treats. I want to encourage all Kentuckians to save their game day shopping for this Saturday, February 11th, which marks the 14th annual Shop and Share event, a one-day goods drive to collect much-needed supplies to support Kentucky's 15 domestic violence shelter programs. This brings me to this week's Team Kentucky All-Stars, the incredible volunteers and shoppers who work so hard to make Shop and Share possible year after year. This event is particularly special to Andy and me. It was founded by his dad, by his mom. Oh, she's going to be mad at me. Yeah. Former First Lady Jane Beshear. Unfortunately, Kentucky has progress to make when it comes to eradicating domestic violence in our communities. Until that day comes, I am grateful we have the support services offered by the Kentucky Coalition Against Domestic Violence and their shelter programs where survivors can find essential supplies and safety. I encourage Kentuckians to visit their local Kroger this Saturday, February 11th, between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. Volunteers will be on site to pass out their local shelter's list of needed donations. You can then shop for donations while picking up your game day supplies and share those donations by dropping them off with the volunteers at your store's exit. Most Kroger locations in the Commonwealth will be participating, as well as select IGA, Food City, Save-A-Lot, and Super Dollar stores in the eastern part of the state. You can find more information at firstlady.ky.gov. Kentucky. This is an easy and fantastic way to support survivors of domestic violence in our communities. We've seen your kindness through the pandemic. We have seen the outpouring of support shown through 2 Christmas toy drives after devastating natural disasters. I ask you to join me once again in sharing that generosity with your neighbors through Shop and Share. It's my honor to partner with the Kentucky Coalition Against Domestic Violence and Kroger for the 3rd time in support of an amazing cause. Let's make 2023 the best Shop and Share yet. Thank you.
All right, we will open it up for questions, and we'll start with the winner of the Winnie Sweepstakes, who's here with us today, who she decided to sit next to, Joe Sanka.
Thank you. Senator Max Wise filed Senate Bill 150 yesterday dealing with student pronouns, gender ID, and parental notification that passed through a Senate committee this morning. Can you comment on that bill and also some comments that he made on the House floor yesterday about Commissioner Glass?
I haven't heard his floor speech and haven't had a chance to read the bill, but I'm struck by the callousness of introducing this type of bill. Senator Karen Berg, just almost right next to you, who buried her son, a month ago? Talk about a lack of disrespect, but empathy for one of your colleagues. And I have real concerns based on what I've heard about the bill, that it'll increase bullying in our schools, especially for students that are already marginalized. As a parent of two middle schoolers, school's hard and bullying is real. We ought to be really thoughtful that we don't do things that subject our kids, anybody's kids, no matter who they are, to more bullying. Tessa.
Thank you, Governor. You addressed some of the concerns regarding the emergency fund check today. As you know, lawmakers the bill before the Senate, as well as this one forthcoming in the House in regards to greater oversight of these funds and investigations into them. Do you have a reaction to that? Do you feel that these are necessary steps?
Well, first, these funds are critically important. Without them, you'd have $52 million less for the West and 13 less for the East. You wouldn't have had funerals paid for. You wouldn't have new homes going up. You wouldn't have dollars in people's pockets who need it, or assistance for farmers. And I would really caution legislators from doing things that might end the ability to have these funds or their flexibility, because all they'll do is mean that there is less money available in future events. The other real concern, because every name that we sent a check to either came from FEMA or private insurance companies. If they go after, how could you rely on those lists? FEMA's going to respond by saying, I guess we have to have even more questions and even more that people have to do to qualify for one of the payments, and just talk to anybody in the East about what they already have to do. But with that said, this is an open book. Everything here is a public record. I've announced every single thing that we've done with it. It's been on the website. You can get every payment to every place through an open records request, and we've got it ready to go. So there's nothing to investigate. It's all right there. But in terms of oversight or reporting, we're happy to do regular reports. And if people want to put that into law, that's fine. We're not concerned at all about more people wanting to know where it goes, but they already do. I mean, we've testified 4 separate times, but if they'd like to put on the books that if you have one of these funds, you'll testify so often, that's fine. We can certainly work with that. But different legislation that would impact the flexibility could end or destroy the ability to do things. Just remember, if, for instance, a legislative appropriation is required, it took them 4 months to create the Western Kentucky Safe Fund while people suffered. Tom.
Thank you, Governor. Good afternoon to you. Last year, you vetoed the bill that dropped the state income tax rate by 0.5%. There's one that just got sent to you this week to drop it further 0.5%. Will you be vetoing House Bill 1?
Last year, I vetoed a bill that increased sales tax that impacts so many Kentuckians at a time of high inflation where things already cost too much. Specifically, I pointed out that they added sales tax to conventions where we've got to be competitive with other places, as well as background checks. Now, I've spent part of my career helping nonprofits institute background checks to help protect people, and then they make them more expensive. That makes our kids less safe. And as somebody who put away more child predators than any other AG in our history, I'm always going to oppose raising the costs of something that are an important tool to keeping our children safe. With regards to this year's House Bill 1, we've not received it yet. I think that the House had already been adjourned. It might have come while we're here. I'm going to look at it and I'm going to review it. I have worries about long-term fiscal policy, but I also have worries about how our families are struggling right now. So it's not just this or that, if you will. It's looking at where we are right now and trying to be real thoughtful about how much it could help right now versus the challenges it could create in the future. Bodie.
Thank you, Governor. Super Bowl's coming up this weekend, and this is going to be another Super Bowl where Kentuckians don't get to place bets on sports.
Yeah.
Want to hear your thoughts on that? About 3,000 unique registered users in the state of Kentucky that are placing bets on Kentucky.
Listen, we should have instituted sports betting 4-5 years ago. Super Bowl is coming up, and it's just a part of people's entertainment. And what's going to happen? They're going to drive, across the border to any of our states, place their bet, give them a chunk of that money, and come back. Or worse, they're going to go celebrate the Super Bowl in another state at an establishment of that state and spend their entertainment dollars there. It is ridiculous that we don't have sports betting now. The leadership of both houses ought to put it up for a vote because it'll pass. And one person in a chamber shouldn't be able to hold back sports betting, much less medical marijuana, when this is what the people want, and that should be enough. All right. You have one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Superintendents and school advocates met with the Juvenile Justice Oversight Council this morning talking about mental health, school safety, and one of the superintendents had said, we want to maybe see more opportunities for treatment centers, things like that, for student safety. Any thought on that?
In the juvenile justice system? So the juvenile justice system, do we have all the blocks? Is really big. And I know you've probably seen this with thousands of employees, but the parts where we've had the issues are a small part of that, right? And I just want to, the part where we've been having issues are just the regional juvenile detention centers and only pre-adjudication detention. We want to provide as many services in pre-adjudication as we can. I will tell you a lot more are provided in the other centers and post-adjudication. The challenge that we have is balancing the fact that they have not been convicted of a crime, and that if they are talking to a therapist about the alleged crime, that their lawyers certainly aren't going to want them to be doing that, and what are we doing with regards to their constitutional rights. But let me first agree with the superintendents. I want to provide more mental health services to every Kentucky youth, every single one, and certainly to those across DJJ and any new best practice that comes out. I want to institute, but so do the members of DJJ. But I will say, because I want us to be realistic, we want to provide as many services as we can in pre-adjudication, but there are challenges and there are some limits. We do believe that the changes we've made are going to make it more possible as well. The biggest challenge we had before is disruption. Most of the time that would come from somebody that has been accused of a very high level crime. But when they cause a major disruption, become violent, you have to lock everything down because the other juveniles could be harmed. And then because we had not equipped and trained our staff with the types of tools they need to stop violence, we'd have to wait until local law enforcement showed up. So what happens there? If you have a counselor visit, it's canceled because it's not safe for them to go in. If you had an education, a classroom, they're not in it. If you were scheduled for a shower, if your parents came to visit. And so one of the things that is going to help us provide uninterrupted services, because that's one of the challenges too. Some of them are available, but they were being interrupted on a regular basis, is this new classification, which does appear to be working. Since we've made the move, we've only had 2 issues. Law enforcement didn't have to step in on either. They were the type of disruptions that normally wouldn't even be public, but we're trying to be real transparent about when they happen. Okay, Stan Ingold from WEKU is on the line.
Thank you, Governor. You've recently said that there were around 11,000 teacher vacancies in the Commonwealth. House Education Committee Chair James Tipton said that he's checked with the KDE, and as of around a month ago, that said there's around 1,500 vacancies. So I just want to some clarification on what the working figure is and why is there such a big difference between the two?
The 11,000 figure has been provided to us 3 separate times through the Department of Education. It was going into this school year, and it is really important that if we're addressing a teacher shortage, we don't use a figure in the middle of the year that includes folks that have been cobbled together to fill these different roles that won't be back the next year. Let me mention another statistic that was testified to, and that's the amount of people each year that don't come back the next year. I think it was, and please use the figure that was testified to. I think it moved from 13 or 17% to over, or maybe 11 was the first year, to over 20% in the next. So if that's the case, and there were 11,000 at the beginning of this school year that they were trying to fill, there's going to be more than that at the beginning of the next school year. And if we go into this and we say, we just need steps that'll fill 1,200, 1,500 positions, oh my goodness, we are not going to take the steps that are necessary to fill those positions and to fill them in the long term instead of how do we get through this year. And I think superintendents will tell you right now, the only resort they have is how do I get through this year? But let me just mention another thing about how we have to do this 5% for our teachers, and it's basic fairness. In the last legislative session, legislators gave themselves an 8% raise. Every single one of them got 8%. But they only provided our school districts with enough money to give teachers a 3% raise. How about our legislature give that extra 5% so our educators get the same raise as our state legislators? Now, unless something happens, we have a 0% vacancy rate in state legislators. People were already applying for the job, where we have a significant vacancy rate in our educators. I think our educators are worth just as much as our legislators, or as the governor. I tried to veto my own 8% raise and they overrode it. So let's just do what's right here. All right, thank you all very much. When are you just hanging out? Going home with Joe?